Welcome, friends. Welcome on the Barricades. This is the second segment of a very interesting episode of our podcast. We are discussing academia with an important researcher and thinker, and should I say, union member Arto Artinian, who teaches at the New York State University. Welcome back to our show. And
Thank you, Marie.
and
Thank you
we were
for the
discussing
invitation.
And we were discussing the academia and how important it is to study academia and how this is not an elitist debate because what people do not understand is that the status of the teachers and also college professors changed over the years. Once a lot of students entered universities, our status changed from that of a privileged elite to that of an intellectual laborer. I would want you to elaborate a little bit on that, and then I would give you my take on what's happening in Romania, because in Romania, inequality and feudalism make it that some of us are very hard work, and are very, you know, this definition is very good for us, for some of us, but we still have some feudal, leaders that are above everyone else and still enjoy a lot of privileges in Romanian academia. So please go ahead with your perspective on the intellectual laborers.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, there, I think modern university education functions on different levels, in different ways, in different but similar ways in different countries. So, in in the United States, my experience that um, it's certainly true that most students in American universities are working class students who come from families where maybe nobody else went to college, and they're the first person who is going to higher education, to university education in their entire family. There are a lot of students like that. There are also obviously students who are from different social classes, like capitalists. So the American university system, I think we can fairly say, represents all social as students and as faculty. So, and of course, this creates cities. So that's why somebody goes to college become different, right? So most of my students, who are in many cases first generation college students, them recent immigrants or sort of American-born students, Native Americans, if you will, who are the first or second person in their family to go to college. How do we classify students? They're not some kind of a part of the intellectual elite who are just getting their training and then they're going to gradually become important journalists in the leading newspapers. No, these are working class kids who are going to higher education for several reasons. One, because it's going to give them a higher paid job, right? It's come away from minimum paid jobs into higher paid jobs. That's the main reason. The second reason is the American education system serves as a welfare institution. It reduces unemployment statistics of the country. So, for example, in the 90s, during President Franklin Roosevelt, the reforms, responding to the Soviet-style socialism, and of course responding to the Great Depression, there was a great expansion of American public universities invested, for the first and last time almost, a lot of money in building new public universities that are designed for working class students. They called them community colleges, local city and state colleges. And the idea was, when the economy is not doing well, unemployed people go take free classes at these local universities and local colleges, even if they're not very good students. So, for example, in American community colleges, these are the lowest level of American university education. That's where I teach, in one of those colleges, which is part of the City University of New York. A community college is the first 2 years of university education. Anybody can get into a community college with a high school diploma. Your grades don't matter, right? In America, they call that open access. This was designed to reduce the unemployment statistics from the point of view of the Democratic Party that was in power in the 19th. At the same time, this was also pushed by progressive educators saw this as a way to open access to university education for the non, because you can go and have education for free or almost free without even having been a good student and pass entrance exams. Right? So I think that's one of the interesting parts of the American education system, which could be used for good purposes. But I think the way it is now, in general, it has been used as a way of just reducing unemployment statistics, because students are not counted as unemployed if they don't have a job. So a 20-year-old student or a 45-year-old student in my college who is not working but is a full-time student will not be counted as for unemployment statistics. So there's all kinds of applications that are there for political purposes and statistical purposes when it comes to college. Who goes to college, right? So it's a complicated question, but it's definitely true that the people who go to college today are not members of an intellectual elite in America. In fact, the opposite is true. Most of my students,
Right.
because most of the students are not only working class, but they're also undereducated. Like most of my students that I teach, I would say 8 out of 10 students um, don't arrive at the university with reading and writing abilities and mathematics abilities, in which that is below the college level. That is not even high
Wow.
school level. But yet they're there because there are remedial classes, there are classes they can take to learn and review and catch up some of the information that they should have learned in high school, but they didn't for whatever reason. Maybe because they come from a country where they can't afford to go to high school, or maybe they graduate from high schools where you can graduate without learning this stuff. So most of my students are not at the college level of reading and writing. If I give them a text, if I give them the first 10 pages of Aristotle, they will not have the text because they never taken philosophy in high school. They may not be able to read it and understand it. So how do you teach a class like that, where 3 students are amazing, dedicated, not only amazing and dedicated, but also intellectually and educationally aligned on the level of a first-year university course in philosophy, right? So they can actually understand material. And then you have 6 other students or 7 other students who can't read well enough to understand Aristotle. That's like a daily reality in many American universities, except the
And
ones that
how
are
do
the
you
more
deal
elite
with that?
universities.
Tell us your secrets. How do you deal with that? Because I think that is the current situation, even in Romania and other parts. We had elite universities, and only students that were bright were there, and I think it was very easy. I mean, your task is so easy with bright students, isn't it? You give them the text, then they give you feedback, and it's such a pleasurable, knowledge adventure, I would call it, because you have partners that are reliable and that could give you
Right.
useful feedback, and you have a true conversation. But on the other hand, you have people that, as you said, are below college level. And how do you deal with that?
Well,
Tell us.
it's very frustrating because as teachers, we try to, because we to the student and we're like, look, you are at this level. That's okay. That's where you are. So let me try to find way. Let's work together. So you're reading and comprehension. So you gain more confidence and you learn. So we try to do that. But then you encounter, as we say, structural barriers. For example, most of these students are very good and very committed students. Like they want to learn. They want to, improve their own knowledge of the world and their own way of thinking, learn a new profession, and so on and so forth. But what if there's a structural problem? What if the student needs to learn how to read better, learn that in 6 months, right? That might take 10 more years of dedicated work. That requires time. And of course, a lot of them don't have time because they have to work. They have to work because otherwise they can't live, because that's the way up, right? It's this brutal capitalist society where 90%, I would say, of my students have at least 1 or 2 jobs. They tell me they have at least 1 or 2 jobs in order to pay rent and buy food. And then they have, when are they going to study? Especially if they're academic and literacy skills are not up to the required level. They need to be studying 40 hours a week. They're working 60 hours a week at their jobs, right? So it's impossible to do it. It's very difficult for most of them. They can't never, most of them, because they just can't afford the time many times, or they don't have the time to study seriously. They don't know what it means to study seriously because they never had the chance to do it. You see, and that's where I personally witness the sort of the true evil of capitalism. I mean, this is what Marx wrote in Capital, Engels. I mean, these are old classic texts, and we're still there. You know, I have students who work 2 jobs in order to be able, and then also college students, because if they go to college, they'll never be able to escape the low-paying jobs they have. But in order to learn something in college, they have to be able to study, and they have to know how to study, which they don't. It's like this closed circle, and that's very demoralizing to see. Makes me very, very, very angry, because the politics are so obvious. You don't just allow students to become college students. Well, what if they don't read and write on the required level? How do you work with them and support them? Well, first of all, they don't have to work. You should create some kind of a condition. If you really cared about these students and their education, you have to create a system where they don't have to work for money. Maybe they get a stipend, right? So they can study 40 hours a week, and they can slowly and deliberately learn
Yes, but
what they need to
I
learn.
think
But that's
there is
impossible
also a
in
huge
the capitalist
problem.
education system.
I think there's also a huge problem with student loans, because I saw one of the university professors here in Romania announcing, "Look, we have this possibility in Romania also for students to get loans," and I was like, I don't think that's a good idea, because usually those loans are very hard to pay back, and usually you become you know, you are in debt all your life for something that should be for free, the education. Why do you allow people to put themselves in such a risky situation where they take a huge loan, and then they are, in debt for life, and forced to get a job to pay it back, when education should be free for them? Because I also have this problem with students that would like to learn, but at the same time their job requirements are, and their jobs are so demanding that they simply don't have the time. And what do you do?
Yeah.
Because you haven't told us. Of course it is the system. Have you found a solution? Do you work extra with them? What do you do exactly?
Well, I mean, on top of everything else, they in the last 20 years, as you said, the whole way of making money out of students. So on top of everything else, not just to train them in a way that would fulfill the class interests and the political interests of the dominant social class, on top of that, they figured out a way to make money from students as well. And the whole college student loan phenomena is possible because the cost of college attendance in the United States was permitted to increase like 900 or 1,000% over the last years or 12 years. That's a deliberate political decision in order to convert these, in order to find a new way of increasing somebody's wealth, as well, and all the intermediary services. How did I deal with it? I mean, we have a union at my university, but
Exactly. I wanted to ask you about that. Please go ahead.
it's a strong union by American standards, but it's a very union by what standard should be. In other words, our union has, it can't really make structural changes. Like I was a member of several factions within the union that were kind of more militant and whatnot. Right now, I'm not a member of any factions because there aren't any really. I mean, there are, but we just can't mobilize beyond a very marginal number of the professors because the political consciousness is very, very reactionary, very conservative and liberal. Not interested in changing the process if we can to something that's different. Point is, you can't do. Yes, you can individually help a student or two, and I've done that. Work extra, meet with the student after class and go over the readings and read their papers again, and but in general, we don't have the power to change any of the fundamental decisions that are happening on campus, because the will is not there, right? So most professors, in my view, uh, are mainstream politics of one way or another. They're totally ideologically indoctrinated. They read the New York Times, they vote for the Party or the Republican Party. They are anti-racist, but they will not necessarily do anything that's going to threaten their job in defending and fighting against racism. They will not risk going on strike to fight for a higher wage for themselves or better student conditions for their students, learning conditions. So in my view, most professors that I've interacted with may sound like they have good politics from my point of view, but they don't, because when the push comes to shove, they're unwilling to risk almost anything of their salary position. So they're not really interested in real change. Neither are the students
That is kind of,
in general.
oh, that is sad. I would like you to tell us more about this union. Where did you become a member, and are you a part of the management, or are you somehow
No.
involved? How
Yeah.
involved are you in this?
So when I was in my PhD program and I started teaching by the hour, right? So 2007, 8, 9, 10. When you join the City University of New York in any of its campuses to teach as a teacher, as a college teacher, they automatically, the union starts taking money dues from your paycheck, which is good. That's a victory that the union won in the 1960s. But you should also know the history of New York City teacher unions is that, and this is directly connected to your point, I think, the first teacher unions in New York City were organized by the Communist Party of the United States. Okay, so the teacher union, as it was called before World War II, was essentially a union organization that was founded, managed, and affiliated with the Communist Party of the United States. So most union members were Communist Party members, and this is the crucial fundamental difference with Euro-socialism and all these other kind of left liberal projects that we struggle against today in Europe, but also are present in, is that the most militant teacher unions in America were either affiliated with the Communist Party, Socialist Party, or the International Workers of the World Anarchist Organization. There were no free unions that were professional organizations, because these are not unions then. So in other words, the first version of my union, the Teacher Union of New York, was a political organization that was part of the Communist Party of the United States. So the union militant because it had clear politics. Every member of that union understood, right, or most members of that union understood what it means to be a member of a union. Later, during the 1950s, McCarthyism and so on and so forth, the teacher union was destroyed. The teachers were fired and repressed. And a new union was created, which was a managed union. And that's the union that teachers, it's called the of teachers, and then later on the Professional Staff Congress, which is the union of college professors in New York City University. These are, in my view, managed unions. They're managed by the Democratic Party. Okay, we always are told to vote for the Democratic Party candidates. We're told by the union leadership to vote for the Democratic candidate for mayor. That's not a real union, because the Democratic Party appoints our bosses, the management. So the moment you vote for somebody who appoints your boss, you're not in a real union, right? So there are no real unions in America the way they were until the 1950s and 60s, with the exception of the IWW unions, and maybe with the partial exception of the Teamsters. This is kind of a big industrial union. Some of the members of the Teamsters, like the longshoremen, the workers who load the containers on the ships in San Francisco, I think they are probably the most powerful independent union in America, other than IWW unions. But most other unions, including I would say my union are essentially, they're not real unions. They're managed unions. They're part of a union that seeks to get along with management most of the time, rather than really wage some kind of a principled political struggle. There are no unions like that I've been a member of. I've never been a member of a union like that here. I mean, that's better than being a member of a union, because a lot of universities in America don't have unions at all. In fact, most of the universities in America do not have unions at all. Not even kind of pseudo union, you know. So I think there's a big problem when a union is just a union by itself and is not associated to some kind of a political organization. Like a lot of the big French unions, you know, historically were always associated with the Socialist Party or the Communist Party, which gave them their strength, right? That's very common in Europe. It used to be very common in Europe, in Western Europe. I think a union that's, unless you're an anarchist union like the IWW, in which case that's a union that's also a party, industrial workers.
Yes.
If a union is just a member of a by itself, then I think that's a professional organization, which means it's not a real political organization for the workers in it. It tends to be much more of a compromise-seeking union. It's not a real union. So I and many other people in the union, when I was 10 years ago, there was a faction. There were several factions: Project, CUNY Contingents Unite, which might still be. These were factions that were basically much more politically clear, and basically were saying, look, we need to do this and this and this in order to maintain our political independence as teachers and to really be able to fight for meaningful change at work. But we were always in the minority, and we were never part of the management. We could never, because you have to win elections on campus to be elected to the management. We will never be able to win those elections to be part of the management. So I was never part of management anywhere in the union. I was always like a local activist in these factions. So as these factions died out, or people left work, or now we're in a crisis where we don't have a faction like that really. There is one, but it's marginalized. So it's tough. We have a union, but in
Yes,
my view, this is not a union. I mean, the union now, the union that I'm a member of, does things like, if you ask the typical college professor at CUNY, they would say, what do I think of the union? I think of the union as the place that provides me with healthcare benefits, a pension, and job security, which is important. But that's a secondary importance. If you want to make the university potential as a place of learning, and not as a place of class segregation and retraining and reproduction, right? But most people union as a place where they get their pension from and their healthcare benefits.
but you told me also the students were very politically knowledgeable, and they were very active, and now that's gone and started to fade away. Why do you think that is, and how did it happen?
In waves. So, probably like if you look at every 10 to 15 years in in my university here, but also Bulgaria, or anywhere in the world, Romania, I think the student movement comes into waves, and I think now we are in a period where, reflecting what's happening in society, I think we're in a place where, since everything is overdetermined by political thought, and ideology, I think the dominant political thinking in terms of what we call progressive movements are political ideas like with Black Lives Matter, or the Me Too movement, and so on and so forth. These are not in the mainstream of those ideas. These are not critical anti-capitalist political struggles. These are not leftist struggles in the sense of, these are not socialist, Marxist, anarchist, or communist ideas, right? So, in other words, a lot of the energy, from my view, a lot of the energy of college students who are politically active is spent on in struggles like that, which are important, not anti-capitalist struggles. So their politics go into kind of different flavors of liberal identity politics, or anti-racist struggle like Black Lives Matter, which is in the words of, there's a great website in New York called Black Agenda Report. It's a podcast. It's run by a kind of famous, well-known older black militants, organizers, and teachers, uh, the current direction of anti-racist struggle that attracts a lot of young people is not anti-capitalist. There's a missing link. I mean, I'm saying this on the public level. I'm sure the movement contains anti-capitalist orientations within it, but I'm looking at the most visible, most hegemonic portion of the movements. There's a lack of connection, explicit connection between capitalism and racism in America, which of course, for at least 100 years by Black Americans like W.B. Du Bois, right? A lot of my students who are from African American and Latino descent in the last 7 years have do politics not through a Marxist or, a anarchist or Marxist kind of lens, but they do it through a lens that's more liberal. Or vaguely social democratic. And social democracy for me is always very confused. Yeah, we can reform capitalism. Well, you can't reform capitalism. We know this. We know this from Rosa Luxemburg from 100 years ago. We know what social democratic parties do. They achieve meaningful reforms, right, in controlling capitalists, and then 10 years later the reforms go. So a lot
Exactly.
of progressive politics in America are either confused social democrats or just liberal identity politics. So that's why the youth is not really as militant as they used to be, I think 10 years ago.
That is kind of sad. I would say that you don't have militant students anymore, and that they don't even realize that their struggles, while it is very important, it is not anti-capitalist. And if you should say something like this, because this is a perfect segue to my next question, if you should say something like this, they would tell something like, you are a class reductionist,
Yeah,
or maybe
absolutely.
that you don't really understand what's going on, or that you tend to downplay their genuine effort for progress, and they would act in a very I would say aggressive way towards you, not understanding that what they're doing is playing into the hands of those in power, because they love having this type of segregated moves where you have people fighting for causes like racism, sexism, but not really anti-capitalism, not really. And even though I think they would
Yeah.
identify themselves with people who are against the system, at the same time, I think most of them do not realize that they are mainly social democrats or liberals.
Yeah. No, you're totally right. And I just read your own history. Read what people wrote 100 years ago, about racism in America. W.B. Du Bois. I mean, there are many names. A lot has been written. But look at the language that they use. It's all about, it all goes back to ideas again. How do you think about? So social justice, just look at the phrase. How can you achieve social justice in a capitalist society, which by definition is a society defined by class warfare, by class conflict between employers and workers? Look at Amazon. look look at the conditions of work for most American workers, or most Romanian workers, most Bulgarian workers. Look at the conditions of labor. How do you have social justice? How can you achieve justice on the question of social divisions and problems in a society that organizes the reproduction of labor and thus life in such a way? It's impossible. So you're clearly framing a wrong question and a wrong answer, because you don't understand how politics works in your society if you use words like justice, right? We're social justice activists. What does that mean? Why don't you just say we are for the overcoming of capitalist division of society? Because we understand that if you don't do that, these divisions will persist forever and new ones will be created because they make capitalism possible. W.B. Du Bois, the great Black American philosopher, communist, and revolutionary organizer, in his one of his early classic books, he asked the question, how come after the Civil War in the United States, when Black people were freed of slavery, they fought for their freedom as part of the Union Army, that defeated the Southern slave-owning Confederate, How come black workers and white workers after the Civil War in America, where there was no more slavery, how come he asked they didn't get along at work? How come they fought each other just as viciously as they should have been fighting their bosses? And the answer, he said, is very simple. He said, because in America, in addition to class division of society, you also have racial division. But the racial division comes from the class division, not the other way around. Racism exists in America because of the particular class divisions of American society. And you invent racism in America, like he said, if you're a capitalist class and you invent racism, you start talking about blacks and whites as being different intellectually and whites are superior. You drive a wedge, he said, in the working class, and you split it in white and black working classes, and you make them fight each other instead of fighting us, the capitalists. And if you do that, you're going to be in power forever. And Du Bois understood this 100 years ago, but for some reason, that's not on the, this should be like on the mouths of every racism activist who engage. This should be the basic of the analysis that's repeated every day. Okay, how meant class unity across race lines, which is what the Black Panthers did and tried to do in the 1960s because they understood racism in America as Black Americans, right? So I think this, yeah, of course I'm going to get accused if I say this not Black and not American, and no, but I'm just repeating what American thinkers and revolutionaries and political activists said 100 years ago.
Yes,
You know,
but don't you run the risk of being cancelled? I mean, in Romania, we are very
that's okay.
provincial in a way. And I would say that coming back to the idea of privileges, we have here a feudal system where you have some people that are there forever in power positions that are very hard to, to get rid of, and they still enjoy a lot of social status, and uh, the problem is that in most of the places where I've worked, usually it is the young women that do all the administrative work, and they are hardworking people that do all the dirty work. So I would say, because you need to get this commission to give you license to teach for 5 years, and then they come back to evaluate you again, and you do have to do a huge, it takes a lot of time, and the last file that I submitted was 1600 pages long in order to pass this evaluation. So there is a lot of bureaucracy, and unfortunately all this bureaucracy is on the shoulder of younger people, and especially women that enter this particular labor force, and the men are in all male panels because in Romania we are very conservative and we don't care about that. That's just some crazy things from the United States. So all male panels, that's not a problem. And this is the situation. It's very unequal, and you have highly exploited people, and at the same time very privileged elites in our universities. But coming back to what we're saying, it's very important. Don't you run the risk of being cancelled? Because also in Romanian university, they kind of feel, that what they're doing is not exactly right, and there might be a chance that people might get a sense of this type of canceling and ideas that you should have women and minorities at the table, and they try to organize some sort of preemptive strike. For instance, they try to pass a law banning all discussion on gender in Romania in fear of having this is
But I
unbelievable.
think
They give examples of how crazy students and sometimes teachers are in the United States trying to cancel everybody else and trying to impose, a very progressive and totalitarian, they say, agenda. When progressives become totalitarian, then they want to throw away Shakespeare and so on and so forth. Is there a pinch of truth in all this fear that mainstream right-wing intellectuals in Romania share?
well, I mean, first of all, cancel culture is politics, and I think I don't care about it because I don't have a big presence on social media anyways, and if they cancel me, it personally doesn't affect me, but I know you can be canceled in ways that would encourage others not to communicate with you based on that. But I think that's a feature of this kind of liberal totalitarian politics, which destroys somebody's reputation, not in a public way that takes advantage of some kind of an intense political fight, but it's done in a way that's essentially a display of authoritarian force. It's a form. So I think the whole cancel culture thing, I think, is toxic, and it's only going to hurt the people who use it, because the right wing, of course, is definitely gonna emphasize cancel culture as their primary target. But I think I'm absolutely convinced that American capitalism will absolutely accommodate all of the critiques of the LGBT community, and these are all, of course, in the 21st century. Sexual minorities should not be criminalized. All logical and true and genuine, politically genuine Marxists believe that. Of course, no minorities, by virtue of their race or by virtue of their sexuality or their should be criminalized and persecuted because of that. That goes without saying. But what are the politics of the mainstream in America, or in my of the mainstream in the States of identity politics on those issues? Their politics are anti-capitalist. They're liberal. So I have no doubts that American capitalism will accommodate all of the demands of the LGBTQ community, all of the debates about transgendered people, whether they should have healthcare rights, or like they're debating in Alabama. I'm sure all of those questions will be accommodated by American capitalism, as long as the struggle over questions of gender do not fuse with anti-capitalist struggles. And to the happy conclusion of most capitalists in America, most of the gender activists are comfortable with capitalism. So that's my problem with those kinds of struggles. If you're anti-racist, if you're a union organizer, if you are a gender equality activist, if your politics are separate and do not include a clear anti-capitalist politics, then I can't possibly support you. Why? Because it's very clear that gender discrimination is an outgrowth of American capitalism. It's just like Du Bois said, right? The wedge, which was used to divide the working class into white and black, is now another wedge which divides the white class into, heterosexual and gay people who are workers, right? So these are just techniques of divide and conquer, right? So it depends what your politics are as a gender activist. Do you really believe in intersectionality, which, by the way, is a term invented by two members of the American Communist Party in the 1950s? This is not known by a lot of identity politics activists. They think intersectionality was invented in the 80s as critical race theory. Critical race theory used intersectionality, which was a concept written by two Communist Party members that were analyzing a totally different part of politics, right? But if your intersectional analysis, you're fighting for gender-based equality, but you do not fight simultaneously for the overcoming of capitalism itself, I can't support you. That's my position, because you're fighting a losing fight. You are fighting for the right to not be criminalized, but the moment you achieve that right, you're not going to care about the Amazon workers who don't have healthcare, because you achieved your demand. You know what I mean? So I think that's the problem. I think the activists that are friends of mine that I support, who are, for example, gay rights activists, at the same time as they're fighting for gay rights and equality and against violence against gay people, they're at the same time fighting against imperialism. They're at the same time engaged against human trafficking in the EU, right? At the same time engaged in the critique of European fundamental law, the acquis communautaire, which is highly reactionary. They are engaged in all of those struggles simultaneously, right? I know very few people like that. Most people, if they're
Yes,
identity
yes,
politics people, they
very
fight for,
unfortunate.
and the right wing critique is correct in saying that we give the right wing a weapon that is effective against those movements. And I'm saying those moments because I will join. I join the parts of those movements that are also fighting all the other struggles that I do my best to commit to the best I can. Because I'm very much interested in making sure that Cuba does not become occupied by imperialists. To me, that's just as important as racism in America, right? But if that's not on their radar, uh, I can't take them seriously, and I don't really support them because I think they're okay with the fundamental structures of capitalism, which means they just want their seat of the table and they're going to be okay with it. So I think a lot of liberal activists are like that, whether they're anti-racists, they're LGBTQ activists, or they're labor union activists. And I think that's the real problem. Yeah.
Yes, this is a very, very important thing that you're saying here. It took me a while because in Romania, especially where is so much misogyny and sexism, if I would have heard somebody talking like this, say 5 years ago, I would have been very angry because, where is so much blatant misogyny is like saying that, look, you are not with me, so therefore you're against me. But I think it is wiser to understand that all these fights, the anti-sexist, the anti-discrimination, the anti-racist fights, can be accommodated by capitalism, and they are
Yeah.
accommodated. You see the CIA, and Glenn Greenwald wrote an interesting article on how the CIA and the NSA draped their buildings into rainbow flags. The most reactionary of the reactionary institutions just played, this progressive. And they want to be perceived as these progressive actors, while in fact they are so deeply committed to destroying countries and to
Yeah.
destroy entire countries, not just minorities. So this is very
But I just want to
troubling
clarify.
indeed.
I just want to clarify. I believe that if there's a struggle for a socialist person, if there's a struggle that we witness, for example, misogyny displayed on a college campus by a chair of department against a professor, we have to confront that. That's a basic political principle because we're talking about a power relationship of force that is not abusive, but it's exploitative. The abuse is not the problem because the word abuse makes it a question of victimhood. Exploitation, I think, is the real word, right? So we have to confront it. If we see a gay person our neighbor is getting beaten up because he or she is gay, we have to confront that because that act of violence is an act of exploit. It's channeling a dominant ideology of violence against another person who is a member of the society, which is unjustifiable. So we have to, as genuine socialists and Marxists and leftists, we have to confront we have to participate in all of these struggles where exploitation and the deployment of this kind of violence for the purpose of taking advantage of somebody else for your own benefit in this way happens. So we have to participate in these struggles. But I'm saying we have to participate in ways that are politically clear. What are we fighting for? Because struggle against racism can take such a form that you end up reinforcing racism at the end. The struggle for gay rights can take place in such a way that at the end of your victory, capitalism is even stronger because of it. Fight for a union at a university place in such a way that the administration is longer relative to the professors and the students, even though we've won. You know what I mean? So I think we have to be very careful on what basis we have to fight on these different issues. What are we fighting for? It can't just be for against abuse or against. No, we have to use different words because I think they clarify what's going on. Like it's not, the violence against women, movement fights against. The problem is not simply the violence against women. The problem is what makes the violence against women possible or happen. Right? So in other words,
Exactly.
somebody gets sexually abused at work by a woman gets sexually abused by a boss who's a guy at work. Obviously, that's a crime. But we're less interested in finding out why this person did it and what he did. And we're more interested in finding what makes this possible in the first place, because this is an ideological struggle. That man had to have grown up learning from a boy that women are objects, that women are not humans like he is, that women are weaker, that women are just good for sex, and it's normal to display sexual aggression and it's good, right? These are ideological constructs that we want to destroy. If we can do that, it doesn't matter how many laws you're going to pass, how many penalties, you're going to throw this guy in jail, happen again by somebody else, guaranteed, if we don't change the logical uh,
Yes,
indoctrination.
and the thing is that transform a political struggle into a moral one, where you have good and bad, and you have some bad
Exactly.
guy that is going to get caught, and once you caught that guy, then yay, the problem is
That never
solved.
worked.
Why?
Yeah,
And that never
right.
works. That never works.
That
So
never
thank you so
works.
much. We didn't have the time, but maybe now, but the last minutes of
Yeah.
our show, to tackle the issue of research. As I told you, in Romania, assessing the merits of academics in terms of research is becoming increasingly bureaucratized, and it's becoming increasingly authoritarian in a way that you are basically forced to publish for free on internationally indexed journals, academic journals. You have a list, and you have to publish there. You have to publish in academic journals that have an impact factor. And this is very difficult. I mean, I published, I paid out of my own salary. I wanted to give my article for free, and they asked me $3,600. And I was like, oh, this is unbelievable. And I said, okay, take it, do whatever. And now if I lose my article, I would I mean, I saved it all over the place, because if I lose it, I will have to buy my own article, because
Yeah.
there is they forbid, all kind of giving it to other people. They said that's illegal because now it's there. So I find this to be deeply problematic, and I will make a confession to you. This is how I became a leftist, because suddenly, when I became this intellectual laborer and they asked me to work for free, and they said I have to build intellectual prestige, and I said, I don't eat intellectual prestige. I eat bread and food. So I need money for my work. So
Yeah.
you tell me that I
Yeah.
have to give my articles for free for these academic capitalist enterprises. This is unbelievable. So tell me, are you forced? Because in Romania, we also have points, everything is translated into points. And at the end of the year, at the university year, you have to have a certain amount of points. And an international conference, say, has 2 points. An article in certain databases has 2 points. An ICI article, that is the one in the EC Thompson, has 10 points, and then you have to gather all these points. And I said, look, we are like Balzac. We have to read and write, constantly, in order to survive and to
Yeah.
produce ever more research that probably nobody reads and has no social impact, since they take it and it's theirs, and they can sell it a million times because it never goes to waste, like a glass or something, so this is the ultimate business. So maybe I threw too much at you, but I would like you to comment on that.
No, no. I think the first problem is that this is a function of, and the same thing in Bulgaria, like my colleagues, and this is a function of the fact that Bulgaria and Romania are colonized societies, right? And the real research is done by the journals in the UK and or English speaking journals, the United States, and so on and so forth. So we are, the Bulgarian and Romanian academics, and the Polish academics, and the so on and so forth, Eastern European. We are colonies of we're the colonized portion of the European Union, and we are colonized in a different way than South Africa and Zimbabwe and India. But we're definitely second class people. So we are judged to be adequate based on our work appearing in the imperial core journals, which are mostly in English, right? They're not in Russian. They're not in uh,
Chinese.
Chinese, because, you know. So in America, I have less of a struggle to do that, because I work in this imperial core. So any journal I send to is automatically an American journal, and it doesn't matter. In my experience in the U.S., now this may not be true anymore, but in my experience, there's no point system. at least not in my university. I haven't heard from my colleagues. But there are formal requirements. Like for me, because I teach in a community college part of the university, I was supposed to publish, ideally, my chair said 4 articles in peer-reviewed journals, and a book contract. On top of that, I can apply for promotion. But in order to keep my job and get the tenure, I must publish at least 4 articles in peer-reviewed journals within 6 years. Otherwise, I won't get the tenure. So there's a clear requirement, and I could choose which peer, as long as they appear in the list of peer-reviewed journals. I know that colleagues who teach in like the more senior colleges and in the more colleges with like the more elite colleges, they have insane requirements. It's like 1 to 2 articles a year. So they have to. I could write 1.5 years at to publish an article, but they might have to do a book every 3 years or every 2 years, a book plus articles. So everybody's writing constantly, like you are. It's just that there's no point system. It's more like the names of the journals. Like if you want this article to count, it can't be in this peer-reviewed journal. It has to be in this peer-reviewed journal. So there's that. It's very similar to what you're. Maybe there's less of the point system, and you don't have to pay out of pocket. In fact, if you have to pay out of pocket, that doesn't really count, right? So,
No, I had to pay
so
for editions because I don't have, the English skills required. So I had to pay
for
the
the yeah,
for the edition because that is mandatory. And if you don't do that, because you have to compete with people that were born there,
yeah,
So I
I
would
have that
never
problem too.
have
Yeah,
that level of English that they have. They have a privileged position all of a sudden, and
yeah.
they don't have this, system where for academics coming from poorer countries they require less. No, they require
You know, this is
quite
this
a
is
lot of money.
colonialism. I mean, Romania has had its share of important 20th century figures in philosophy and Bulgarian. But here's the thing: like I'm friends and colleagues with an institute for super modern Institute of Super Modern Capitalism, and so, and it's headed by a senior Bulgarian philosopher, Dejan Dejanov, who's world class, thinker. And in the words of some of his colleagues from Berlin University and major German universities, they call them probably the leading center of Marxist thought in Europe. But he writes in Bulgarian, because he writes in Bulgarian, and he's a great thinker. Developing the dialectical logic of Marxist capital, and I keep telling him, I say, Dayan, we have to publish all of your work in English, because otherwise nobody will read it. Nobody will know it. That's the sort of curse of peripheral colonized. Because if this was the socialist era, for example, yes, there was ideological barriers there too, but there would be no problem of his work being translated in all the major languages. The state publishing house would do it, but now he has to do it. He has to find a way to translate his institute's work in English. So of course it has to happen with free labor. I'm going to translate parts of it. Other people are going to translate part of it. He's going to translate part of it himself, right? For free. Why? We live in the peripheral colonized part of the world where academia is also colonized. So we are exploited more than the scholarship that's in the core of the imperialist world, right? So this is another difficulty that we're facing, because we have to write in English, which is not a native language. If you don't write in English, nobody's going to read it, except the audiences in our own countries, which are very small. And the purpose of research is universal access. Everybody should be able to access everybody else's research, but they make money from that too, those publishers, as you know. I'm supposed to write a book that's 7 years late, of course. So next year I have a sabbatical, so I'm supposed to finish it. The book is going to be published by an academic press, Brill, in Europe, and parts of historical materialism in England, West. But anyways, the first edition is going to be hardcover. It's probably going to cost $120, which means no university libraries, the publisher will make its profit. So,
Yeah. That's also a way, to transfer money from public universities to private pockets of the publishing houses, and the system goes on and on. Thank you so much for being here with us. I
That
hope the viewers found this discussion interesting, and I only reached the surface of the things that I wanted to discuss with you. Thanks again for being here with us, and thanks our viewers for watching. Go please to our Patreon page, support us, because you're our only supporters. We don't have oligarchs or important Soros or Putin or anyone else behind us. We are on our own, and we need your support. Thanks for watching, and keep fighting, stay healthy, and we are going to see you all next week. Thanks again.